the D2L. So everything you need for this course you will find in D2L platform. So the entire semester contains 14 weeks, right? So you have 14 learning lessons, and therefore you have basically 14 topics and 14 book chapters or 15 book chapters. I needed to squeeze 2 chapters into 1 chapter, into 1 lesson because of this recent changes in our schedule. It used to be a 15-week semester, and now we have 14 weeks. So we needed to squeeze certain things here. So you will find everything here. First of all, you should read syllabus carefully. Syllabus you may access from here. This is your syllabus that outlines policies, requirements. You will read it. You will learn 3 credit hours. As far as the office hours are concerned, usually I don't quite maintain office hours, but I appreciate if you contact me, send me an email and schedule a Zoom meeting with me. That will work perfectly and better for me, okay? The textbook is online. You can find it under this module called Start Here. And here is the link to several versions of the textbook. One version is paid. You're leasing the textbook, but you don't have to. There are some other versions of the textbook which are actually quite better to use, more useful for you. And I will explain why this one is better, because it's better to navigate. From the syllabus, you will learn about requirements for the course. You will have 2 sets of assignments. A reading assignment, which will give you 60% to your final grade. That will come from the reading assignment, and I will explain what you need to do for the reading assignment. And the rest, 40%, will come from a number of quizzes, which are 5, and a final quiz. Final quiz, make sure it's optional. Final quiz, you have to take your final quiz if you want to improve your grade, if you want to get the lowest quiz score dropped and replaced with the final. If the final is the lowest one, it will not be counted, it will be dropped. So final quiz, if you take it, will replace the lowest quiz score, but quizzes overall will give you 40% to your final grade. So most weight is on the reading assignment. Pay attention to the reading assignments. Your readings will come from the textbook. So every week you will have a chapter from the textbook. Like this week, we will be exploring these basics, like what is history, the origins of humankind, Paleolithic and Neolithic ages, basics. And you have to find and read a document for this week. It's about an Iceman found somewhere in caves. This is a brief contents here. By clicking, it's interactive. By clicking on chapter, you will be directed to the chapter. So it's very easy to handle that version of the textbook. The document you will find in this more detailed contents. Chapter 1, Earliest Human Societies. This chapter is our Unit 1 and our first week chapter. You need to read this chapter, and you will find the document right here. Where is that document about the Iceman? It's here. So you'll find that here. You'll click on that, and you will be directed to the document. What I want you to do in this reading assignment, what I expect from my students, you read the document, and then you will find something interesting, something that captures your attention, and you want to learn about that, and you want to discuss that aspect. Formulate your question and post it to the discussion module, either under discussions, under activities, discussions. You will find the Iceman. You will click on this Iceman and you will place your question you want to ask. Try to do that by every Wednesday. By the end of Wednesday, you should post your question. I don't reinforce that deadline policy. You can do that later, but try to do that. Try to complete that weekly reading assignment by posting your question by the end of every Wednesday. And by the following Monday, you will read other students' questions and find something that you're interested in, your favorite question, and answer that question from another student. Is this clear? So that will complete the reading assignment. So this week you will be reading about the Iceman who lived during the Mesolith, a transitionary time period between Paleolith and Neolith. And it looks like this person was more original to Europe than people who came later, because scientists who found his body wanted to find out if he relates to some modern people somewhere, and they couldn't find that, but they found actually it's in I think in Sardinia somewhere, when original people came and they wouldn't move around, but still remained in Sardinia. So here he relates to some folks in Sardinia. Well, but you will learn about this. Yes, you had a question.
Yes, I had a question about when you respond to the others.
Uh-huh.
How many? Is it one?
One.
Oh, just one?
One.
And is it a word count first when you respond?
Well, about 50 words.
50 for each?
Yeah,
Discussion. Okay.
for each discussion.
Okay.
Your own question should be about up to 100 words, from 50 to 100. It's easy to write.
Also, our question
Uh-huh.
has to be between 50 to 100 words.
Yeah.
Okay.
So first you would like to introduce your question in general kind of preamble or some terms, and then state your question, and then answer, respond to another student, and that will complete the reading assignment. So you will have, I think, 14 reading assignments. For every week you will have a document. You will read the document, post your question, and reply to another student. In the D2L you also have a lot of learning materials that facilitate your learning, for the quiz, for instance. like there is some outlines for chapter 1, earliest human societies, origins and development of people. You will click on that and you see here what you need to focus on when you're reading a chapter of the textbook. That's what you need to keep in mind and look for that information in the chapter. Then you have chapter outline right here. That helps you read the textbook, because textbooks sometimes usually are written in a kind of way that is hard to follow, and that outline will help you navigate the textbook. Review questions will help. For the first week, only a couple of questions. Explain the impact systematic agriculture had on the life of Neolithic people. What's important here? How farming influenced human life? What did it do for human society? It became sedentary. They began to build permanent settlements and all other developments that would follow, that would come out of that. Okay, so is this clear, guys? Quizzes or multiple choice, basically objective. Every quiz will have about 25 multiple choice questions. Those questions will come from my lectures and from the textbook. Questions for the most part aren't detailed or specific. They're more like general, like you should be able to explain or recognize like the Neolithic way of life or Paleolithic way of life. About that, so more general questions. So you may also access the reading assignment from weekly modules, like from here, either from the discussion module or from the weekly. You will be directed to the same place. Here you will start a new thread, you will post your question. The subject would be Iceman, and here is your text. Any questions, guys? I will start taking attendance. I think there'll be some more folks will enroll, or maybe some people will drop. I will start taking attendance in a couple of weeks. Yes.
So I know she asked how long the responses have to be. You said it was 50 words, right?
About 50.
So
Should be several sentences, yeah.
with their questions, should it be the same amount or just the responses?
What do you mean?
Like when we upload our own questions for everybody else to respond to, should it be the same length? Or should it just be like a simple question?
The simple question, yes, you will find someone's question, you will reply to that question, you will see that here, yeah.
So what I was saying, okay, when you post a question, the question shouldn't be 50 words.
Well, it should be several sentences at least, yeah.
Okay, but the response to your
About
your
50,
should be
yeah.
50.
Then your question should be about 50 words. Because you need to introduce your question with some kind of introduction, preamble, or like say something about this phenomena that you read, and yeah. It's easy to write that.
No, it's not. I was just trying to make sure.
Yeah.
Was I looking at questions?
Question should be well informed, to the point. So your response should be informed. I should have an impression that you know the material, that you learned something from that chapter. The document is quite interesting about the Iceman. So, folks, is everything clear? Yes.
So are we answering our own question, or are we just posting?
You don't have to answer your own question. You probably know your answer. Your question will be answered by someone. You can write a reply to that answer if you want to. It's fine, but it's not a requirement. It is not a requirement. Is everything clear, guys? Yes.
How many people do we have to respond to?
One person, one student. If you want to reply to the several students, it's fine. But the requirement, the minimal, is one student that you need to reply to. Is this clear? Excellent, folks, excellent. That should be a really good, interesting semester, in fact. Okay, so the course, let me say a few words in general about the course. We will explore earliest civilizations that turned out to have a continuing significance. We will explore origins like what we have. What we have, we take that for granted, but everything has its origin, like paper, for instance. Where does it come from? The paper. Who invented paper? We don't use paper anymore. We use laptops, but paper. It came from China, a Chinese civilization. They developed and invented that method of making paper. Script that you're using and you call like English alphabet, which is based on Latin, but where the Latin come from? From Etruscans. Etruscans inherited that from the Greeks, with some changes, of course, because they needed to accommodate sounds, and this alphabet is based on sound. There's some other alphabets, hieroglyphic, pictographic symbols. Symbols stand for words, and this alphabet stands for sounds. That principle was invented by the so-called Phoenicians, people from the Near East, from Palestine. They engaged in commercial activities. They were the Mediterranean Sea traders, and they were thinking, their minds were set on efficiency, how to record words in the most efficient way. Let's dissect words into sounds. And every sound has its symbol, a letter, as opposed to pictographic symbols that stand for words. That means that how many words do we have? There's so many symbols we should have. So early Egyptian pictographic symbols, Chinese pictographic symbols, the numerous, whereas alphabet, originally the Phoenician alphabet had 28 pictographic symbols. So everything has its origin, and we will learn about, so that's this course is about. We will talk and explore the earliest Chinese civilization. We'll talk about the earliest river valley civilizations, agricultural societies. When life became agricultural, that gave a rise of the so-called civilizations. And we will explore this term today. What is a civilization? What is a civilization? Well, first of all, let me start with this. What is history and why we need to learn history? Some people always respond that one needs to know history. Maybe it can give a chance to avoid repeating some mistakes. But it actually doesn't happen. People are making mistakes over and over. So history basically is the record of the past. That's what it is. Any kind of record. Record can be in the form of an artifact, and we can read that artifact, particularly as regards some very distant past, pre-literate societies before the written language. Everything can be a source, can represent some kind of record. And records on written languages emerged. We can read those languages and interpret. So basically, it's not an kind of approach is disciplinary. It is an academic discipline. And that is important to remember, because historians are following a certain kind of broadly accepted methodology, historical method. We are interpreting, looking for sources, primary sources, records, artifacts, analyze them, synthesize, and interpret. So history is a matter of interpretation, therefore history is quite subjective and is always living, because there can be many interpretations on the same event. The same development can generate so many interpretations, sometimes quite contradictory interpretations, like, for example, slavery in the United States generated so many interpretations, so many scholars offered different viewpoints, like Eugene Genovese's very classic approach to slavery, as opposed to Stanley Engerman, who used quantitative method of analysis. Very different approach to the same phenomena. And my goal here is to introduce you to many possible worths of paying attention to interpretations, and you will figure it out for yourself, what you should follow, what kind of interpretation. So that's, having said that, folks, I said that with a certain purpose. Why? What is my purpose of saying and stating that history is an academic discipline? Because now I will be speaking about the origins of humankind. And what is accepted by the academia is the Darwinian theory of evolution. You know that there are many other kind of ideas and perceptions about origins of humankind. Nothing is certain. Darwinian theory of evolution is very well supported by evidence, by archaeology and especially by paleontology, by embryology. Darwin he should be interpreted within the context of his time period when he lived. He was a British naturalist. He was interested in the nature. He observed species of various kinds. And he came to believe, not just he, but many scientists of this time period, and this time period is known as positivism, materialistic approach to life, as opposed to like theological approach as it was before. In the mid-19th century, that positivism prevailed, and Darwin, as a positivist scientist, approached humankind with that materialistic viewpoint. So he believed that the fittest species, members of a species, tend to survive longer, and they pass their features to their descent. And that's how this evolution takes place over time. And that takes millions of years. Species survive, the species who fit their immediate environment. That helps explain like why dinosaurs died out, because they couldn't survive the environmental change. They failed to adapt to that drastic environmental change that happened. So environment also is an important agent here in this evolution of humankind. And according to Darwin, human species evolved from apes, ground-dwelling apes. Then that happened about 4 million years ago, or maybe 10 million years ago. That's what archaeological, paleontological discoveries explain. First, remains of those creatures were discovered in Africa. They were ground dwelling, and they would experience this evolution that took over millions of years. And there are stages in that evolution. Of course, everything here depends on archaeology and paleontology. That is very important to remember. The earliest primates lived about 60 million years ago. They grew in size. They became ground-dwelling apes. And scientists believe that about 28 million years ago, there are some important changes that happened to this primate order. It became differentiated. One line evolved into the tree-dwelling apes, and one kind evolved into ground-dwelling apes, and they started walking, and that type is known as hominid, pre-humans, or basically what scientists believe they were direct ancestors of humans. So over millions of years, they learned to walk upright. By walking, their legs grew longer. They became manually skillful or dexterity. They developed manual dexterity. The thumb moved to this position. Their heads also shifted toward a more upright position. And that development, according to scientists, favored the progressive expansion of brain that led to Homo sapiens, or thinking man. Over past 50 years, scholars learn a lot about these hominids because of the paleontology, advances in paleontology, their development and their relation to Homo sapiens. There's some important paleontological discoveries took place. In 1998, paleontologists found a fossilized hominid. That creature was 4 feet tall, and the age was about 3.5 million years. In southern Africa, near Johannesburg. So first, the earliest creatures were discovered in Africa. They discovered then more advanced creatures. They called them Homo habilis, skillful man. They were about from 2 to 1.5 million years old. That means that they lived about 2 to 1.5 million years ago, and they were able to produce stone tools. Then this evolution continues further. Humankind evolved into what became known as Homo erectus, more advanced creatures. They discovered fossils of this species. And Homo erectus, they knew how to produce, how to start fire and how to keep fire. They were able to do that. And they were more upward and they were taller, and their fossils were discovered throughout Eurasia and Africa and the Americas. And that made scientists believe that Homo erectus spread. They came out of Africa and they would spread throughout the rest of the world. From about 200,000 to 400, principal inhabitants of Europe and Asia and Africa were Homo habilis, and there's some branch of this Homo habilis called the Neanderthal man. They relate to Homo sapiens, but that was a branch that came out of that Homo erectus and do not relate directly. Homo sapiens did not evolve directly from the Neanderthal man. There is some research that suggests that they intermingled at some point, but they didn't. Homo sapiens didn't come directly from the Neanderthal man. And Cro-Magnons, and finally Homo sapiens, thinking man, that developed all these characteristics that we currently have. This evolution took over millions of years, and the species that emerged, Homo sapiens, or if you look at this 20,000 years, is relatively young species compared to other species. People are the youngest species on this earth. And people continue to evolve. It's hard to tell because of that the time period is not millions of years, but we're talking about 20,000 years as opposed to millions of years. So it's hard to distinguish that changes that happen to humankind, but they definitely happen because human beings, people today are different from people who lived 20,000 years ago and are different from people who lived in the Middle Ages. If you're visiting museums like American museums, let's say a Metropolitan Museum, and you may see medieval armed knights with this arm clad. What can you tell about this arm clad? Did you notice something unusual? Shoe size and the size itself. People were smaller. The shoe size was way smaller than people have nowadays. People are growing, in fact. So this evolution still continues, and we don't know what would happen, how people would look like in about 2,000 years from today if humanity survives. It will be something different. We can't even imagine. So that's about the evolution. And again, as I've said, Darwin lived during the time of positivism, and he had a very materialistic approach to the origins of humankind. You know that some people are talking about creationism, some people are talking about scientific creationism, some people could refer to involvement of some aliens. Well, maybe that happened, but the thing is this about creationism: we don't have any evidence that we have this fossils, paleontology, embryology supports the Darwinian theory of evolution. And remember that Darwin argued that the fittest species tends to live longer and accumulates qualities and features and would pass those features to their descent. Fittest, that's important to remember. Not the strongest. Dinosaurs died out. Cockroaches survived. You know, the longest, the oldest species on Earth, and perhaps in cosmos, or what? Viruses. Very simple bodies and structures. They survive. They could be frozen and then defrost and get alive again. A human body, it's hard to do that with a human body which is very complex. So that's about the origins of humankind, and the theory of evolution is represented here as some pictures here. Speaking about this theory of evolution, in the mid-19th century, there is also some theory came around that talked about evolution of human societies. Some social thinkers try to adopt a Darwinian theory of biological evolution on social evolution. They started talking about survival of the strongest, that strongest societies survived, and that would contribute to a rise of certain ideologies in the 19th century, the late 19th century, that we often identify with extreme nationalism and even racism. But Darwin himself was against application of his theory of biological selection on social selection, what is called social Darwinism. He was against that. Here is a graph that shows that people 10 million years ago developed bipedalism because they started walking, and work and walking made people people. Then Australopithecus, the first stone tools about 3 million years ago, Homo habilis. That practice of making stones, in fact, became a kind of business and made people again manually able. That cartoon represents that what made people work. And now people tend to work less and less. Homo erectus, it's an artistic representation of how Homo erectus learned to use fire. Basically, according to Darwin, humankind, it definitely had a lot of interesting characteristics that define humankind. Humankind have vision, certain different from animals, very complex. Also, humankind developed speech. Earliest creatures, they didn't really speak. They were able to make sounds like animals, but then speech became. That's because of our brain. And what is speech? Speech is an ability to communicate symbolically, to communicate with symbols. Symbols, sounds or symbols that represent something. So I'm communicating and I'm using symbols, sounds. That's one of the characteristics of humankind. Animal world, largely, they don't have that. Speaking about the differences between people, humankind, and the rest of the animal world. Because for Darwin, people, in a way, are animals, but there's something that distinguishes people. People should not separate themselves from the rest of the animal world in a way. But there are certain things that characterize people and other animals do not have. What do you think that is really distinguishes people from the rest of the animal world? What distinguishes? Yes.
Our higher thinking ability.
Higher thinking?
Yeah, we can think more complex.
More complex. What else? Yes, perhaps. What else do you think, folks, makes people different from animals? Yeah. Empathy and morality, that other animals you think don't have morality. Morality not to that point that people have, yeah. Animals would, in fact, they would take care of the weak, whatever, babies, surprisingly, but certainly they don't have that complex morality that people have. And of course, ability to communicate symbolically, and the symbolism is an important aspect in humankind, because religion, probably that's what people have, and animals probably don't have religion. Do you think that animals believe in God? Probably not. That's another characteristic and quality of people that comes out from the ability to think symbolically. What else that distinguishes people from the rest of the animal world? Yes.
Able to build like societies.
Societies, absolutely. People, well, they came to this point when they started to build societies, when they became sedentary and agricultural, when they experienced agricultural revolution. Societies became more complex, whereas before society was very limited to a tribe or a group of hunters and gatherers. And Neolithic people started to create societies and civilizations, larger social groups. Yeah, that is absolutely right. What else may distinguish people from the rest? People try to, if animals tend to adapt themselves to the environment for the most part, people want to change that environment to serve their goals, their needs, you know. Let's change that, let's change the course of the river, the direction of river. That happens in history over and over through building dams, and that can change the river, flood. People tend to change the environment for their needs. Animals usually adapt themselves to the environment. But people, of course, they probably don't want that, but people adapt. They have to adapt to the environment. That's what is happening naturally, without any kind of effort of people to adapt themselves to a certain environment. Environment changes people, but people try to change the environment at the same time. What else, folks, that may distinguish people from other animals? Well, of course, people believe in God, Creator, for the most part. Maybe now that doesn't matter anymore, but during the Middle Ages, it mattered. And we will talk about the Middle Ages, the rise of religions, and we will talk about in this course, we will explore a development of religious thought. We'll talk about polytheism, first of all. Earliest societies tried to explain the nature of phenomena by referring it to something supernatural, gods, nature gods. Then the idea of monotheism came, then the origins of modern religions, Judaism, Christianity that came out of Judaism, and then Islam came. Islam also came out of Judaism and Christianity. There was another interesting religion that emerged and developed in Persia. It's called Zoroastrianism. Another very interesting kind of religious theological approach to this universe, explaining the universe in dualistic terms. We will talk about that. Chinese philosophy, Chinese civilization didn't produce any religion originally. They would later adopt Buddhism, but they produced, their civilization pioneered and produced philosophy. Confucianism, Taoism, legalism, and we will talk about that. Confucianism, Confucius was preoccupied and was interested in this kind of questions about humanity and human society that Europeans would try to think about that and approach 2000 years later during the European Enlightenment. A Chinese civilization was concerned about that 2000 years before the European Enlightenment. That suggests something about the Chinese civilization. It was very advanced and very, very interesting, and that enjoyed incredibly long-lasting history. And that gave the world so many things that we don't even think about that as Chinese originally. Paper, porcelain, gunpowder, seismograph, what else? During the Industrial Revolution, there was someone, engineer, he invented, his name was Henry Bessemer. He invented converter that people, manufacturers could produce steel through that converter. Converter would blow air through melting pig iron, and by doing that, it would reduce carbon component from pig iron, get out of it, would make steel. And the Chinese know that principle again about 2000 years before, and they use that principle. Well, guys, I think on this note we will finish today's lecture, and on Thursday we will talk about Paleolith and Neolith, and next week we will explore Mesopotamia and Egypt and other Near Eastern civilizations. Any questions, guys? Is everything clear? All right, you all have a great rest of the day, guys.